Chapter 1. The lonely field. A quiet evening was descending on the small town of Riverview. Lost in the endless prairies, a cold autumn wind swept through the deserted streets, rustling fallen leaves and carrying the smell of fire from the few chimneys in the town's homes. Beyond the town lay a cornfield stretching 4 miles. The field belonged to an old farmer named Henry Carmichael. Since his wife's death, the farmer rarely showed up in town and lived a secluded life, working from dawn till dusk on his land. Everyone knew that Carmichael's cornfield was always well kept, but once the sun set, it turned into a gloomy and mysterious place. Thick rows of corn reached up to the sky, and in the middle of the field, like a sinister sentinel, stood a scarecrow. At first glance, it was just an ordinary scarecrow, old clothes stuffed with straw, a faceless cloth head with black painted eyes and mouth. But as soon as night fell, its appearance instilled an inexplicable fear. Local children had long been afraid to go near the field after dark. It was believed that the scarecrow on Carmichael's field guarded the corn from the depths of darkness. Once, some boys tried to approach it at night, but one of them, Tommy West, swore he saw the scarecrow move. They never returned there again. Chapter 2. The strange job. One late evening, a young man named Mark came to Carmichael's door. He was looking for a job for the summer, and he didn't care what kind of work he would have to do. Henry studied him with his tired eyes, and apparently seeing something he liked, he offered, "You'll help me with the harvest, but there's one rule: never go near the scarecrow at night." Mark laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Why?" he asked, expecting to hear some silly legend. Henry did not smile. "Because it sees and hears, and if it moves, don't come back." Since Mark started working for Carmichael, the days had blended into long, monotonous, laborious days. He woke up early in the morning, harvested corn, helped repair fences, and cleaned barns. But the closer night came, the stronger his urge to approach the mysterious scarecrow. Mark often noticed how old Henry stared intently toward the field where the scarecrow stood. His face took on an expression of unclear anxiety, as if he feared something that Mark could not understand. Chapter 3. The ghostly night. One night, Mark stayed on the field longer than usual. He wanted to finish repairing a fence, and the sun had long since disappeared below the horizon. The wind picked up, and in its howling, there was a strange, barely audible whisper. When he turned around, he noticed that the scarecrow seemed to have turned in his direction. At first, Mark thought it was just the play of shadows and moonlight, which had peeked out from behind the clouds. But suddenly he felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching him closely. His heart began to pound faster. He took a lantern and slowly walked towards the scarecrow. He wanted to make sure it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But the closer he got, the more it seemed that the scarecrow had indeed changed its position. Its empty black eyes were now looking directly at him. "Nonsense," he muttered to himself and, laughing at his fear, was about to turn back when he heard a faint rustling behind him. Turning around, he saw nothing unusual, just rows of corn swaying in the wind, but his body was suddenly covered in a cold sweat. Then he heard a quiet whisper, seemingly coming from all directions. "Leave, leave." He froze, listening to the silence. The night was dark, and the moon was no longer visible. Mark felt his legs start to give way. "Who's there?" he shouted loudly, but in response, there was only the same whisper, only now more insistent. "Leave, while you still can." Mark ran. He ran with all his might, without looking back, feeling the wind biting his face and the sinister laughter echoing from somewhere deep in the corn. Chapter 4. Old stories. The next day, Mark tried to explain to himself what had happened, convincing himself that he was just tired and overworked. But a strange, sticky fear remained in his soul, which he could not shake off. Henry noticed his anxiety and quietly asked, "Did you go near the scarecrow?" Mark hesitated for a moment, but then, realizing there was no point in lying, nodded. The old man sighed heavily. "Listen, I didn't ask you to stay away from it for no reason. That scarecrow has been here for a long time, longer than even I've been around. They say was put here by my grandfather to guard the harvest, but since then it has become more than just a scarecrow. People whisper about a curse that is connected to this field." Henry paused for a moment, then continued, "My grandfather, old James, once told me that the scarecrow was made from an old rag doll he found in the woods. He said the doll was cursed, that it belonged to a witch who lived here long ago. And when he placed this scarecrow in the field to guard the harvest, strange things began to happen." Henry's eyes glistened in the dim light of the kitchen, and his voice grew quieter. "A few farmers died. They were found in the field with no footprints around. They say they tried to destroy the scarecrow, but it always returned. Any night when someone tried to get close to it, they would hear the whisper." Chapter 5. Ominous signs. Over the next few days, Mark tried to forget the story he had heard. He kept himself busy, exhausting himself with work, so there was no time left to think. Henry spoke less and less, lost in his thoughts, and his gaze had become distant and troubled. Mark couldn't shake off the old man's words about the curse. They seemed to have taken root in his mind, just like the whisper that he kept hearing in the silence of the night. One evening, Mark noticed that the corn on a section of the field had withered. The green stalks had turned yellow. The leaves drooped as if something was draining the life out of them. He approached this section and stopped. Right in the center of the dried-up circle stood the scarecrow. It seemed to be standing closer than before. Its eyes, black and empty, were directed straight at Mark. He felt his palms grow sweaty. Old Henry noticed his hesitation and walked over. "It's happening," he muttered, looking at the field. "It's starting again. It doesn't like it when you get too close." Mark felt a strange feeling growing in his chest, a mixture of fear and curiosity. He wanted to know more. "What do you mean?" he asked, feeling his voice tremble. Henry sadly shook his head. "You're better off not asking. Just stay away and do your job if you want to stay safe." Chapter 6. The Witch's Curse. That night, after Henry had gone to bed, Mark couldn't sleep. Questions and images of the scarecrow kept circling in his mind over and over again. He decided to go back to the village to learn more about the legends surrounding Carmichael's field. Mark headed to an old bar on the outskirts, where the town's old-timers gathered to discuss news and exchange rumors. The bar was dark and smoky. Mark approached the counter and ordered a beer, listening to the conversations around him. He knew many of the town's residents loved to tell stories about curses and ghosts, and he hoped to hear something useful. After a while, he noticed an old woman in the corner of the bar, Mrs. Alderson, the local herbalist, who was rumored to know all the old secrets. "You're talking about Carmichael's field?" she asked hoarsely when Mark approached her. Mark nodded. "Yes, Henry told me something. I want to understand why he's so afraid of that scarecrow." The old woman smiled, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "People fear what they don't understand. Your employer wasn't always like this. Once, he tried to destroy what now guards his field. But curses are not easily lifted." Mark listened attentively. Mrs. Alderson continued, "They say that there once was a witch who lived in these parts. She hid in the woods, avoiding people. But one day, she was spotted, and people began blaming her for all the misfortunes in the village: poor harvests, livestock diseases, even the disappearances of children. The villagers banded together and burned her house down with her inside. But before she died, she cast a curse. Her spirit passed into an old rag doll, which became the scarecrow, and now it lives in the field, feeding on pain and fear until it finds freedom." Mark felt his heart beat faster. "How can it be freed?" Mrs. Alderson shook her head. "No one knows. But one thing is clear. The closer you get to it, the stronger it becomes, and the more it desires the one who disturbs its peace." Chapter 7. Nightmares. Returning to the farm, Mark lay in bed, but sleep would not come. The words of the old woman kept spinning in his head. He felt two emotions battling within him: intense fear and a strange, inexplicable attraction to the place and its mystery. Finally, sleep overtook him, but it was troubled. In his dream, Mark saw himself standing in the field, among the corn. Everything around him was dark, as if in the deepest depths of night. He felt a cold wind that pierced him to the bones. And suddenly, from the depths of the field, a figure began to approach him. It was the Scarecrow, but its movements were not like those of a puppet on a stick. It walked like a living being. Its black eyes gleamed, and from its slightly open mouth came a familiar whisper. "Leave, leave." Mark wanted to scream, but the voice stuck in his throat. The Scarecrow kept coming closer, its steps growing faster and faster, and there it was, standing right in front of him. Mark smelled its odor, the scent of rotting straw, damp earth, and something more sinister, like decomposing flesh. He woke up screaming, breathing heavily, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He looked out the window and saw the moonlight flooding the field. The Scarecrow stood still, but it seemed that its gaze was directed right at his window. Chapter 8. The foggy morning. In the morning, Mark decided he couldn't take the uncertainty any longer. He approached Henry and said, "I want to understand what's going on in your field. I don't believe in curses, but something isn't right here." Henry sighed wearily. "You're stubborn, just like I was at your age. You want answers, Fine. But remember one thing, don't touch it." Mark decided he would find out the truth himself. He needed to find out how the Scarecrow was connected to the curse, and whether there was a way to get rid of it. He returned to the field, carefully examining every detail around the Scarecrow, but he found nothing unusual, just an old rusty bucket and some broken sticks lying at its base. Then Mark decided to come closer, even if it meant breaking Henry's rule. He reached out to touch the Scarecrow's cloth head, and at that moment, a strong gust of wind struck his face, knocking him off his feet. He felt an invisible force lift him and push him back. In fear, Mark let go of the Scarecrow and stepped back a few paces. This time, he was sure something was truly guarding this place.